Just days from now, the NDP will be presenting their mini-budget through an interim supply bill. This mini-budget will mean the NDP will want the Legislature to sign off on tens of billions of dollars to prop up a budget framework put forward by former Premier Alison Redford in 2014, the last budget actually passed by the Legislature. Typically in Alberta, governments have a well-established history of ramming through interim supply bills with little ministerial accountability over any new spending announcements in departments. With the new NDP government looking to meet hundreds of millions of dollars, potentially billions, in new spending commitments, this mini-budget must be presented openly and transparently to the public. This is no usual interim supply bill. We know these supply bills have a history of hiding new spending projects. Many of you will remember last March when the former Progressive Conservative government tried to find $18 million to funnel towards a golf course run by PC insiders and cronies. And it's exactly this type of spending that needs to be avoided in interim supply bills. Albertans elected a strong Wildrose official opposition to make sure that the government would not be handed a blank check. That is exactly what we are doing here today. We are looking to work collaboratively with our new colleagues in the NDP government. But let's be clear. The NDP has sent mixed signals to Albertans about the true nature of Alberta's finances, and Albertans expect clarity. Today, we are putting forward recommendations to ensure that this mini-budget is fully vetted and open to the public. We believe that all ministers must account for new spending items presented in their mini-budget and be accountable to answer for them in the Legislature, just as they would be during a normal budget process. We are expecting this bill to be fully debated in the House and that the government will not invoke closure at its earliest convenience, as it has condemned the PCs for doing in the past. We want a commitment from the government not to delay the full budget beyond September 2015 and to give Albertans a firm timeline for the budget, for when the budget will be fully implemented. We believe full information needs to be released on the true state of Alberta's finances, including revenue shortfalls, Alberta's total debt, and the true size and scope of Alberta's deficit. Simply put, we cannot sign off on billions of dollars in new spending without knowing how much red ink the province will be running up in the process. And finally, we want to work with the NDP to restore basic, accountable accounting practices to Alberta's finances that have been tossed aside in recent years. To justify record spending and borrowing, the PCs for years hid the true nature of Alberta's debt and deficit. Albertans cannot trust PC accounting tricks. I have personally campaigned for years to restore integrity to Alberta's financial reporting, and it's time we put that practice to an end. Now, we know and understand it's early days for the new NDP government, and we are here to help, provide ideas and make recommendations, and work with the NDP on making government work for all Albertans. We are hopeful and encouraged that we can work with the NDP on these critical issues of transparency and better government, and we hope in the coming days that they will implement our recommendations. Thank you, and I'm happy to take your questions.
So Derek, if I was going to hide something, like a golf course money, in this spend bill, how would I do it? What should the public be looking for? Would it be just encapsulated under some other broad title or something, or how would they game it, I guess is my question.
Typically, interim supply bills provide very minimal detail. They say how much money is going to go into operating, how much is going to go in capital for a specific spending item, or a basket of items, and there's little detail. But normally an interim supply bill is for a few $100,000 or a few tens of millions. It's extraordinarily rare, perhaps even unprecedented, that you would see an interim supply bill for tens of billions of dollars, potentially adding up to nearly half of the budget, effectively. That's why this is really a mini budget. And when you're looking at beyond a few $100,000 and into the billions, we should be provided with a lot more information than here's how much money we need. That's typically what an interim supply bill is, but they're asking for a lot more money than a normal interim supply bill.
Derek, what indication do you have that there might be other spending initiatives sort of tucked away that you may not be aware of?
Well, when you're talking about an interim supply bill that makes up potentially half the budget, or 1/3 to half the budget, it's essentially asking for a blank check unless they provide the same details as they normally provide in a budget. Now, we understand that the NDP are not prepared at this time to bring forward a full budget, and that that is perhaps reasonable, but if they're going to ask for money to be running between 1/3 of the fiscal year spending to 1/2 of the fiscal year spending, they're going to have to provide a lot more detail than a typical interim supply bill. That means we need to see line by line departmental funding. We need to be able to compare it to the year-end financial statements that have not yet come out, but we have to be able to compare it to the last budget to be able to compare fiscal years. Frankly, I'd be very concerned if the government actually knows what the deficit will be. Not that the previous government had any idea what the deficit was.
They've already mentioned increased funding for education. Are there any other areas that have caught your attention in regards to spending leading up to this mini budget?
You know, the government has been making a lot of new spending announcements, be it reversing the closure of Young Offenders Center in Calgary. Many of these spending announcements are perhaps very reasonable measures, but they need to be costed. You can't be pulling this money from thin air, which is why we need the big picture of the finances with the details to see if the numbers actually add up. It's a very large concern of ours that during the campaign, the NDP's platform did not receive quite the same scrutiny as other parties did, and the numbers did not quite add up. My fear is that they're not going to bring in as much revenue as their tax measures claim that they will, and they'll either have to raise taxes more than they've said they will not meet their new spending commitments as robustly as they would like, or they'll be taking on more debt than they said they will be during the campaign. Good opposition means helping to keep the government on the straight and narrow. And for us to do that, we're going to need proper information. We're not here to give the government a blank check.
The Premier has said, it was a couple weeks ago, when she finally got to look at the numbers, look behind the curtain, what the government had been talking about wasn't really what was the reality for numbers, but she didn't explain herself.
Mm-hmm.
Does she have a duty to explain that discrepancy
Yes.
to the public? Would you be asking her about that?
Absolutely. It could have meant, in my own view, it could have meant one of two things. One was that revenue projections were not as the government said, and if so, then that's a surprise to us as well. But we'd be happy to see what the Premier and the Finance Minister have on that front. Or on the other side, I would not be surprised, when they say that, how did we had no idea that the PCs were cooking the books and taking about $5 billion a year off the main set of books to try and hide it and take on debt. And I mean, it was a pretty poorly kept secret. I don't know how many times I stood in this room or right outside of this room in my previous capacity telling everybody exactly about that. I mean, the NDP have been aware for years that the PCs have been cooking the books, that the accounting has not been straightforward and transparent. So if that's what they're talking about, it's a bit strange for them to pretend to be surprised. But the Premier could also mean on the other side that perhaps revenue projections are not quite as rosy as they said. But I look forward to asking the Premier and the Finance Minister about this in the Legislature next week.
I want to get you on minimum wage. The stakeholders are meeting today. Is there any danger to Alberta's economy if we go too fast on minimum wage being increased to $15?
Mm-hmm. The NDP's election promise of a $15 minimum wage, they've already had to back away from it to a degree. I mean, they implied pretty strongly to their supporters that this was just going to happen overnight and there's no consequence to it. This is largely the result of a platform never meant to be fully implemented in government. This was an opposition platform meant to make a few ideological points and move the ball in their direction. It was never meant to be fully implemented. So they've already backed away from that and saying they're going to phase it in. Now, phasing it in will mean the effects are not quite as tough on small business as they otherwise would be, but it is still going to hurt small business. I just this week, I met with small businesses in Strathmore who are very concerned. They're looking at moving to, the fast food businesses are looking at moving towards automation. Restaurants are looking at raising their prices. I spoke to several workers in restaurants who are minimum wage earners who actually feel that they're going to actually take home less in the end because it'll hurt tips. I mean, there's a lot of unintended consequences to this, and I think the government would be well served to its own supporters if it put this on pause and actually studied the issue. The economics of it just don't make sense, and while it's well-intentioned, it is likely to hurt the people it's most intended to help.
Nathan, can I ask you about the upcoming sitting then, the session? What can you tell us in terms of what you've been informed of in terms of the legislation that's coming besides the spending bill? And also, can you address what the MPs and you have always sort of gone after the PCs for using backbench questions, not as for what they're intended, but it's kind of as, you know, puffball announcements.
Sure, yeah.
Do you hope that this government will allow backbenchers to ask real questions of the government?
Well, you know, I think if we look across the jurisdictions across Canada, there's lots of jurisdictions that have no backbench puffball questions. And so I encouraged the government that we move in that direction. I'm not entirely sure that that's where we're going to end up. I believe that we'll come to an agreement that will allow the government to ask a number of questions of itself. And so we'll see just how puffbally they are and how they move in the direction of puff from the start to the end of the session. But we will reach an agreement that's going to have some NDP backbench questions. Sorry, it's hard for me to make the transition there. So specifically to legislation. We haven't heard too much. We're sort of in a very similar camp to you guys when it comes to the upcoming session. I know that we're only 5 days away. We understand, just like you, that there's going to be a couple of bills, and it would only really be speculation on my part at this point in time. I hope that moving forward, when the government gets their feet underneath them, that we'll be able to have a little bit more robust discussion prior to sessions. We recognize that the timelines were pretty tight. I haven't been overwhelmed by the cooperation thus far. There's been some significant back and forth, and I'd hope that we'd be able to arrive at an agreement a little bit quicker. That's in my opinion, a little more fair to the opposition. But we'll see if we get there in the end. I might just add that the discussion that we had about the legislative changes, we can expect to see none of those. None of the 12 recommendations in this session. The government House leader has mentioned that he would like to talk about it, but they're not willing to talk about it till towards the end of the summer or into the early fall. So it's my hope that we'll be able to have some meaningful change for the session in the fall. But of course, the longer these things go, the less likely there is to be change.
I'm sorry, in the minutes, I tried to pin the finance minister down yesterday about will there be a corporate tax hike in this session. He seems to have told one outlet yes, but he wouldn't confirm that to me. If he did that, how would he do that? Would that have to be part of the interim supply bill?
There is some mechanism that they could introduce an additional Finance Reform Act, something like that. So there is the avenue which they could raise corporate taxes or personal taxes separate. In fact, it would definitely have to be outside of the interim supply bill, but I haven't heard whether that's the case or not the case. So you'd probably be best to press the finance minister.
Would you like to see a bill banning corporate union donations right off the hop?
Well, we have long been advocates that we need to get big business out of politics in Alberta. And it's certainly something that, depending on the structure of a potential bill like that, we could join forces on. We've been clear previously that we'd be happy to do that. Currently we're right in the middle of an election period that doesn't actually end until the 5th of July. So obviously there'd be some nuances and some debate that would have to take place, but generally speaking, we would certainly support banning corporate and union donation.
Time for one or two more questions? All good? All right.
Thanks guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for your patience with the technical difficulties.
Yeah.
I think I now found the source of the problem.
Better luck next time.